Oddworld Smile Factory is a fan game I worked on a couple of years ago, and just as I make videos that tell the lore of Oddworld, Smile Factory was me trying to tell the lore through the medium of gaming. And as it's been a while, I figured I might as well do a video explaining some of it. It wasn't just me embellishing and doing whatever I want though. Generally, all of the lore in this game is kept within the confines of established Oddworld lore, but is my own expansion and interpretation of what we already know about the Oddworld universe. And if you're curious, for anyone that wants to try it first before I spoil it all, as it happens it can be played on itch.io or GameJolt, links in the description and pinned comment. And I'd appreciate it if you'd rate or like the game if you care to. Oddworld Smile Factory is set in Viker's Labs. This is not the same one that appeared in Munch's Odyssey, which was Viker's Labs 13. This is an earlier facility. Let's call it Viker's Labs 11. I think that's what it kind of was in my head, I guess, but ultimately it doesn't matter. Although it's not Viker's Labs 13, I did naturally base the architecture and whatnot on it, so that's a good excuse for anything that's inaccurate. It's just not meant to be the same place. In fact, to further suggest that this is an early Viker's facility, I didn't comprehensively use the Viker's logo that we know, and instead used a more basic version. However, that's slowly being replaced by the Viker's conglomerate logo during a renovation. Prior to this particular Viker factory contained a marketing department, in which the Viker scientists and engineers produced marketing tools for the Industrial Society of Oddworld. You know, they're the graphic designers that make the Rupture Farms posters, and the engineers that produce vendo machines and stuff like that. And their latest invention is something quite interesting that they want to show and hopefully sell to the gluckons of the Magog cartel. The game itself takes place in the aftermath of this, in a factory now abandoned, left so suddenly that it's still set up for the tour of the building to showcase their products to potential clients, as the player gets to see for themselves. Now, as for who exactly the character you're playing as is, well, as far as I'm concerned, the character is a nameless Mudokan janitor of this factory, who's decided to take this opportunity of the building now being nearly empty to finally try to escape and make his way to freedom. But ultimately this isn't really important, and as a result it's not blatantly explained, although for those that care to look around the starting area there are some clues as to what the character is, but as I said, it's unimportant to the game. You know, it's like, why is the girl in the middle of a forest in Slender Man the 8 pages and that kind of thing. It doesn't matter, it's just a first person game and the character is you basically. Ironically, the concept of the character that I laid out, that being of a Mudokan janitor of an industrial factory that wants to get out of here, is literally a description of Abe, which is funny because I'm pretty sure I wasn't purposefully trying to make him like Abe. I guess being a janitor just makes sense as an explanation as to why a character would be in the middle of a dangerous factory. So he sets off on his journey throughout this industrial hell, making his way through the now condemned and seemingly empty parts of the building. Going through the marketing department, he encounters the remnants of the Viker's tour, proudly unveiling their latest genius invention, the self-promoting vending machine. No longer do the capitalists have to make their customers go to their vending machines to buy their products. Now the machines go after them. But the Vikers didn't stop there. No, this is an all-in-one machine that also acts as a company greeter for businesses, using a motion scanner to welcome business partners into their facilities and detect any intruders who are summarily electrocuted. The player first encounters the silhouettes of these machines left abandoned in a shut-down room. He pulls a lever to power the door, but this also powers the assembly line thereon. Oh well, they're just vending machines. But unfortunately, as the player discovers via what's left in the factory, such as random newspapers that are pinned to walls for some reason, the machines of course glitched out and went haywire, becoming known for their habit of killing their customers instead. Naturally, this is a PR disaster. You can't sell a refreshing beverage to dead customers, and as a result, this Viker's Labs facility was shut down. Never mind though, the player finally arrives at the lifts, ready to make his way to freedom. However, the Vikers have anticipated that many of their workers may desire to leave, without giving 14 days notice first. As a result, they've set up a complex system of elevators throughout the factory that need to be taken in order to reach one that can actually get to the exit, which of course is really just my excuse for why the player has to keep taking multiple lifts and doesn't just take an elevator directly to the exit, otherwise it'd be a pretty short game. Instead, there's multiple levels, both in universe and out. In the next level, the player encounters and has to avoid the activated greeters, now wandering about after being powered up and distributed by the assembly line throughout the abandoned facility. Along the way, he finds out about the legal battles between the Gluckons and the Vikers, and also how they eventually came to an agreement. I somewhat imply that it was General Drippick that was the Gluckon that made the deal to have the Vikers retrofit the self-promoting vending machines into greeter security drones. He seems like a Gluckon that would see the positive side in a machine going wrong and killing people. And also, it's kind of such a stupid reason to end up doing something beneficial for the Gluckons. Like Drippick negotiates this deal for such a stupid reason, but it's a success as they're deployed in multiple factories and this gets him promoted or whatever. Maybe. It would kind of explain how Drippick became so high up despite being probably the most stupid Gluckon ever encountered in the Oddworld games. And plus, in Abe's Exodus, Drippick, who is the head of Slick Barracks, chooses to be personally guarded by greeters. So to me it kind of added up that such an egotistical Gluckon, who literally has a massive sculpture of himself in his office, would have greeters around him as well, as though they were an achievement of his. This is just my embellishment of course, but I just felt it fit well, so hinted in Smile Factory that Drippick is the one that agreed to the greeter retrofit, and is a reason why he's such a high-ranked Gluckon. Eventually, the player makes their way to the next level, which I like the room that this level takes place in because of the ceiling. You're now in the dome apex, one might say. And it's unintentionally quite pertinent that this is the only level in which I bothered to deviate from the modular design of the rest of the game's ceilings and do something custom instead, as it's in this level that we learn more about the fate of the building itself. It seems the Vikers have got plans for it, and as we learn further on in the game, while the Vikers have suddenly abandoned this building, they're moving into a new one with the interns due to do all the manual labour of moving their equipment into the new place and all that. As you might expect, you know, the Vikers aren't gonna do it themselves of course. And it's during this quiet period between the Vikers moving out and the interns not having arrived yet to collect their things that the janitor has taken the opportunity to escape. Shortly before renovations of this facility are due to begin as part of a rebrand. But renovated into what exactly? The new Batcave by the looks of it? Well, while it may no longer be a Vikers Labs, it's still a Vikers conglomerate building, and we find out the intended fate of this place in the final scene of the game. It's due to be transformed from being a Vikers Labs to being a Vikers Asylum, specifically one called Moldeb Asylum, which is something that I have completely made up by the way. Ironically, this actually mirrors my original intentions with this game. Originally, it was going to be set in this active asylum, and the game itself was going to be called Oddworld Asylum, with the interns and the Vikers being the primary enemies. Smile Factory was just going to be the name of the third level. That wasn't until many months into development when I realised, man, programming intern and Viker enemies in the way I imagined is really difficult, but greeters are so simple. They just go from one point to another, and that's about it. Like, I literally programmed them just casually, fairly early on in development, just as a bonus enemy. After still having made no progress on the living enemies, I just decided it'd be easier to make the game about the greeters instead. instead. But I think this was actually a very beneficial change. I did this project simply to learn how to make games in Unreal Engine and whatnot. I wasn't intending to tell a story with it in any way. Oddworld Asylum was literally just going to be an FPS horror with no story and no explanations. Just you're in a creepy Oddworld Asylum, avoiding Oddworld enemies. By focusing it down onto the greeters, it allowed me to take the opportunity to tell the lore of how the greeters were created, which gave it more direction, I guess. So I kind of like how the story of the setting actually mirrors the development of the game. In real life, the asylum became the factory, and in the story, the factory becomes the asylum. But furthermore, and perhaps quite oddly, this was in particular actually inspired by a real event that I remember reading about in school. Wasn't taught about it in school, by the way, I just used to read random stuff on the school computers for some reason. So to clarify, it was based on my possibly incorrect recollection of what I remember reading many years ago about this scandal that happened with the Sunday newspaper, The News of the World, where their journalists or whoever were like doing some dodgy stuff, like hacking people's phones to get news stories and that kind of thing. Eventually they got found out, and the newspaper, which I think was the oldest newspaper still running up to that point, was shut down. But the thing I remember that I thought was weird was that the company that owned the News of the World basically just set up a new newspaper, The Sun on Sunday, and a lot of the people that were involved in the dodgy stuff at the News of the World just went and worked for that newspaper instead. And I remember thinking that was weird. It was like the brand took the hit for the scandal, and a lot of the people that were actually involved with the scandal just went and started working for a new newspaper set up by the company that was really basically just a rebrand of the old newspaper. This is how I remember it anyway. I might be wrong, I think that seems about right. So I was kind of inspired by that with this game. The Vickers Labs facility has a scandal, creating and selling the greeters, which go horribly wrong and start killing their customers, and as a result there's naturally a great outcry about it, and the lab's reputation is ruined. How could anyone trust them again? As a result, the company that owns the facility, the Vickers conglomerate, acts like they're sorting out the problem and taking responsibility by shutting down the Vickers Labs that was responsible for this horrible event, when in reality what they're doing is moving the Vickers that worked there into a new place, like just another Vickers Labs. Let's say they now work for Vickers Labs 14 instead of Vickers Labs 11 or something like that, where they'll no doubt just continue doing the same work that they were doing before. Basically erasing or trying to erase all association with the scandal by reusing and most importantly rebranding the building that was once Vickers Labs 11 into Moldeb Asylum. So yeah, that's just something I kind of always remember thinking was weird. I didn't set out to put that in the story, by the way, it just kind of formed naturally. I think I still liked that idea I'd already established of Moldeb Asylum, so even though I was changing the game to Oddworld Smile Factory, I still wanted to include the idea of it, and so I think that's why I had it in there, and the rest of it just flowed naturally out of that, I guess. Or maybe it came from, as I said, Smile Factory was originally going to be the third level of Oddworld Asylum, so I had already formed the idea of the asylum previously having been the place where the Vickers were invented, because right from the beginning, with that level idea, I wanted the player to be going through and seeing all these greeter parts and whatnot, and Oddworld fans slowly coming to the realization that the greeters were also in this game. But it wouldn't have made sense that an asylum would be a place where the greeters were invented, so I think I'd already explained why that was in my head, that it used to be a factory but was retrofitted. Anyway, so as for the player in Oddworld Smile Factory, basically they make their way to the final level, in which we see the interns having finally arrived to do all the manual labour, which I just realised incidentally makes sense what with this level being right near the exit, which the player makes their way to if they successfully avoid the interns, and just as they're about to escape, a Viker arrives and captures the player. Then there's a cutscene of two Vikers talking to each other who are working on the greeter retrofit project. The greeters that were on the assembly line were recently retrofitted as security drones and waiting to be tested, and when you powered them up while you were trying to escape, well, the Vikers probably knew all along that this was going on. Like, even in an abandoned factory, it seems unlikely you'd be able to go through multiple levels, travelling throughout this entire facility without being noticed. I should have put like cameras or something, hinting at the idea that they were watching you. In fact, with Oddworld Asylum, if I recall correctly, it would have the same twist, and in the first screen of the game you would see a window high up of two Vikers observing you. They could have got you at any moment, but they realised this was a wonderful opportunity to see how effective the greeters were at protecting industrial buildings. You were their lab rat, and they were waiting for you to get zapped. But by this point, if you've reached this part of the game, they've clearly failed, hence why one of them says,
"Oh, I can't believe it, he got away!"
disappointed that their inventions failed to be effective security guards, far too easy to get away from. So just before you got to the exit, the Vikers finally conclude, well, that test was a failure, now let's get this guy ourselves. So they get you, and who knows what happens to you next. The Viker that gets you says, "Kill him!" which suggests they intend to kill you, but in the cutscene one says,
"Ah, let him go, he's ugly."
I think to me that's suggesting that they probably don't just kill him straight away. I think I felt like they'd put him in the asylum for some reason, or maybe just put him back to work as a janitor in the asylum perhaps. I think I was setting it up so theoretically I could actually make Oddworld Asylum as a sequel, but I have no intentions of doing that, among other reasons because this game is simple and yet it took me so long to do. In fact, making this game has put me off making games. Either way, as I said at the beginning, the main character isn't really important. Why he's there and what happens to him afterwards is somewhat irrelevant. The game's not about him, he's just the vessel through which the player experiences the true story, or just has a hopefully fun time avoiding greeters. Continuing on with the final cutscene, we see that now the Vikers have, thanks to you, implemented improvements to the greeters, which puts them in line with how they function in Exodus, with the move-in motion scanner and that sort of thing, making them harder to get away from like you were able to. Which I like because it explains why they aren't already like this in Smile Factory. When in reality, it was just because I couldn't be bothered to figure out how to actually do them like that. And this sort of sets this game up as kind of being like a prequel to Exodus in a non-intrusive way, because we're seeing how the greeters developed into what we saw in Exodus. Just in general, I try to keep this game in line with primarily the PS1 Oddworld games. In fact, here's a little side note. I actually bought and used a sample pack that was used to make the soundtracks of those first two games, so that even the music of Oddworld Smile Factory has the same DNA as Abe's Odyssey and Abe's Exodus. Those two games of course have multiple endings, and a lot of people worked out by the setup of the final part of Smile Factory that there was likewise meant to be multiple endings in this game as well. Either you got away from the Viker or you didn't. I came up with this situation very early on actually, which is ironic because in the end I didn't end up doing it, which in retrospect surprises me because I think it actually would have been relatively simple to do. But by this point I think I've been working on the game for so long that again I just couldn't be bothered really. I did look into it, but I don't know, I guess I probably came across obstacles that made me go, screw it. But I think I had two ideas as to what would happen if you avoided the Viker and got out successfully. I think originally, it was just the good ending, you escaped and that was it, you were free. I think I was going to make a cutscene of a Mudokan running through the desert away from the building, and then he'd look back and see purple lights coming up from it, hinting that maybe they'll be coming after him in their UFOs, and left it a bit ambiguous as to whether he truly got away. Later on down the line I had another idea I was going to do instead if you made it, which would be as you were walking out the corridor to freedom, thinking you'd got away from the Viker, suddenly another one descends down in front of you in his UFO. And so basically that would have been more definitive that no matter what, you can't escape from the Vikers and they will always get you. And that's about it. I didn't talk about everything, you know, there's more to this game, but that's just like pretty much the gist of the story and the inspirations behind Oddworld Smile Factory.
Hello, follow me.